Hey fam, Daniel here and welcome back to Whole True Apologetics, where we seek answers to tough questions. Well, we've been on this journey these last few weeks on dealing with this question of who is God. And the reason we're dealing with this question is because if we answer this question incorrectly, it will directly affect every aspect of our lives. For example, and I mentioned this before, if we view God as distant and uncaring, well, that's going to directly affect how we interact with God, how we interact with each other, how we go through difficult times. So therefore, we got to understand and we got to answer this question of who is God correctly. So we've looked at a couple attributes of God in the Bible the last couple weeks, and we're going to deal with one more today. And the one we're dealing with today is, we'll say, very difficult for us to comprehend. All right, is the fact that God is eternal. God is eternal. This is clearly seen through Scripture. Now, the reason this is hard for us to understand God being eternal, I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, but the reason it's hard for us to understand or comprehend is because everything we know ends. This video will end. On a more serious level, we know you and me, we eventually die. And so everything we know ends. And so when I talk about God being eternal, that's hard to comprehend because we don't have a one-to-one connection in this life. But that does not mean that's not true. Scripture is clear that God is eternal. And there's going to be things about God that we're not going to fully comprehend because God is God and we are not. And that's okay. That's okay. It says through Scripture there's going to be things that are unsearchable or unknowable at times about God. That's okay. And one of those aspects is the fact that God is eternal. But we can understand some things about it, and I want to touch on why this is important for us. Why is it important that God is eternal, and why is it important for us to understand at least some of that? Let me start by reading this verse, just this portion of the verse. It says in Deuteronomy 33, verse 27, it says, "The eternal God is our refuge." This is not the first time something like this is said in Scripture. So the fact that God is eternal seems to bring this sense of hope and protection. A refuge is a place where someone would be protected and would give them hope. And so, well, the fact that God is eternal should bring us that hope and that refuge. But it's not going to if we don't understand what that means and why it's important. Now, what I mean by God being eternal is that it refers to He existed forever. Stretching backwards and forward, He's existed forever. There isn't a time that He has not existed. David Jeremiah stated this: God never had a beginning and will never have an ending. There will never be a time when He was not, and there will never be a time when He ceases to be. And a Puritan by the name of Stephen Charnock, I don't know if I said that last name right, but this quote still stands the same. It says, "God neither began with the beginning of time, nor will expire with the end of it. He is not a temporal God, but an eternal God." You hear that? God is not a temporal God, but an eternal God. That is powerful. And simply it means that God has always existed. Now, yes, this is very hard for us to understand. But this is a very important attribute of who God is, that He is eternal. The fact that Psalms was saying that our refuge is in the fact that God is an eternal God. We should wrestle and grapple with this. But so why does it matter and what does it mean? The fact that we see what it means is that He's always existed, but why does it matter? Well, see, first off, that God exists outside of time. Well, God's created time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God is not bound to time in that way, as you and me are. And that means also that God sees a full picture. God sees past, present, and future. I did that kind of backwards. Past, present, and future. Sorry. God sees past, present, and future. God sees the full picture. Why does that matter that God sees the full picture? Because God stands on this side. He's looking and He sees everything because He's created and holds and controls everything. God sees it all. Why does that matter? Because when you're going through a difficult time, understanding that God sees the full picture is vital. Because if we think God does not see the full picture, He's trying to figure things out on the way too, that plays into, well, why would I trust Him if He's still trying to figure it out and He doesn't know what's going on? But the fact that God is not trying to just figure it out, but God sees the full picture, gives us great hope. Because though we can't see tomorrow, God's already created tomorrow. God's already been at tomorrow. God already seen tomorrow and the day after day after day after. God controls that. God holds that. That gives us great hope. And in fact, also as we're looking around our world and whoever's in power here or there, the scripture is clear that times and seasons and those in authority and non-authority, all in the control of God. God's not trying to figure things out. In Daniel 22 verse 21, it says, He changes the times and seasons, He removes kings and raises kings up. So those in power for a time, but God's in control. He sees the full picture. God's created the full picture. God holds the whole picture. So you see the hope that gives when we understand that when we're going through difficult times, God's not trying to figure it out alongside us. God already holds tomorrow and already has the answer. He's saying, just trust me, though you can't see the full picture. That plays in the fact that God is eternal, that God stands outside of time. God is not bound to time in the way that you and me are. And also in this, we understand that it gives us this purpose understanding that when God's created everything, He's also created us with a purpose from beginning to end, from our birth to our death, that there's a purpose for us. You see in Psalm 139 verse 16, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when yet there was none of them. In other words, God saw every single day. God's created. Psalm is not written to give us like, oh no, like my days are numbered idea. No, it's like this hope of understanding that God has written down tomorrow already. I just need to walk out and trust Him. And so God knows the days of our birth, the day of our birth. God knows the day of our death. God controls the seasons that we're going through. God sees the full picture. Charles Spurgeon put this, and I love how he said this. He says, whatever occurs around us, we need not be alarmed. We are mortal until our work is done. What he meant by that is when we're walking in the purpose God has created us, nothing can stop that until God is done with us. That is a beautiful understanding. And so how does the eternality or God being eternal, why is that important for us to start to comprehend? Because it gives us great hope. God is not walking along trying to figure out what to do. God already sees tomorrow. God actually already created tomorrow. God already sustains tomorrow, the next year, the next 1,000 years. God already sustains all eternity in His hands. So God's not surprised by anything. So that gives us hope and a reason to trust Him. For if God was not eternal, what kind of hope would there be? What kind of hope would there be a God that's trying to figure things out? It gives us a sure, steady, foundational hope that God is eternal. And it understands that though we can't see tomorrow, God already holds tomorrow in His hands. And so that is why we got to start grappling with this understanding that God is eternal. Because in it, remember it says, the eternal God is our refuge. That is where our hope, the fact that God is already stepping back. He's seen the whole picture. He's already created and holds the whole picture. He's just saying, including our tomorrows, He's just called us to trust Him and walk out in the days that He's already written down and saying, this is what I've created you for. Now we're to walk out in it. What hope that gives us. As we're going through difficult times, difficult seasons, no matter what's going on, we could trust Him because God is in control and God already holds and sees tomorrow. He's not trying to figure things out. So, hope you guys have a good day, and we will see you next week. Hey family, if you found this helpful or challenging, I encourage you, like, subscribe, and share this video to anybody and everybody that you know.